The Black Sea is one of the world's military hotspots, and to understand it, you need to know about the Montreux Convention. It seems to be almost a law of nature that whenever there is a discussion about a military issue in the Black Sea, then somebody will say, oh, but you forget to consider the Montreux Convention, so whatever you think you know, it's probably wrong. And sometimes that is right, but often it's not. Because the Montreux Convention really only covers some very specific things, and we should be careful and not to assume that everything about the Black Sea is special. So what is the Montreux Convention? Well, officially it's called the Convention Regarding the Regime of the Straits, and it regulates the Turkish Straits. But because the Turkish Straits are a choke point that controls the access to the Black Sea, then that's really important. The Montreux Convention was written between World War I and World War II, and therefore there are some rules about the military use of the Turkish Straits that require a bit of historical context to make sense, really. So the Montreux Convention was signed in 1936. And before that, the Straits were regulated by the Lausanne Treaty from 1923. It had established some rules about how military ships could use the Straits, but most importantly, it meant that the areas around the Turkish Straits were a demilitarized zone. So there was an area inside of Turkey where they were not allowed to have a military presence. In the 1920s, that had made some sense because there was a kind of pacifistic vibe about international politics, and most states reduced their military spending in the 1920s. But by the 1930s, the situation was very different. Especially Turkey was concerned about Italy, which had become a strong fascist military power. So Turkey suggested that there should be a new negotiation, and in 1936 a group of countries met in Montreux, which is a city in Switzerland. The three most interesting viewpoints that needed to be balanced were probably those of Turkey and the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom. Turkey wanted to remilitarize the area and to get as much control over the Straits as possible. The Soviet Union wanted unrestricted passage so that their Black Sea fleet could have access into the Mediterranean. And the British wanted, on the other hand, some limitations on that so that the Soviet Union wouldn't have too much influence in the Mediterranean. And what we have today is a compromise between these three considerations. So with that historical context, it's time to look at what the Montreux Convention actually says. First, it says that the Turkish Straits are open for merchant vessels unless they are from a country that Turkey is at war with. So very few restrictions on merchant vessels. With warships, there are more restrictions. If Turkey is at war, they have the right to do whatever they want, really. So they can close the straits if that's what they want. If other states are at war, but Turkey is neutral, then the straits are closed for those belligerent countries. In times of peace, the rules are more complicated, and I will go through some of the most important ones. I will put a link to the actual convention in the video description. It's a little frustrating to read, to be honest, because it's English and French mixed together in the same document. But if you want to, you can find the original text. But to take some of the more interesting rules first, the Montreux Convention does not allow aircraft carriers to pass, so no aircraft carriers. There is a loophole here because ships that are primarily designed for other purposes, but that can also carry aircraft, are not included. So that's why the Soviet Union invented the concept of aircraft carrying cruisers where they installed missiles on the ships, and they claimed that this was their primary purpose. So we have the Russian aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov. It is, technically speaking, not an aircraft carrier, and it can sail into the Black Sea. That's, of course, not in line with the spirit of the convention, but everyone seems to have just decided that it's better to give this concession to Russia, because in practical terms, it doesn't matter very much. The important thing is that other countries, such as the United States or the United Kingdom or France, they cannot put an aircraft carrier into the Black Sea. Also, submarines are not allowed to pass the Turkish Straits. Again, there are loopholes. So Black Sea powers, so countries with a coastline to the Black Sea, they can build submarines outside the Black Sea and transport them through the straits. And they can also exit from the Black Sea when they need to go for maintenance outside. So Russia is allowed to build their submarines on shipyards in the Baltic, for example, and they can also send them back to the Baltic for maintenance. But Russia is, technically speaking, not allowed to send submarines from the Black Sea on patrol in the Mediterranean. That's something that they clearly do anyways, because they have submarines on patrol all the time, but technically speaking, they're not allowed to do that. Then there are rules that make sure that non-Black Sea states cannot have too much naval power in the Black Sea. So basically, this limits the ability to conduct expeditionary operations into the Black Sea from the outside. For example, non-Black Sea states cannot have a ship in the Black Sea that is larger than 10,000 tons. So that's a destroyer, basically. Also, ships from non-Black Sea states can only stay for 21 days before they have to leave. So they cannot stay permanently. States also need to give a warning to Turkey before passage. For non-Black Sea states, that is 15 days in advance, and for Black Sea states, it is 8 days. So this means that there is a large degree of predictability about naval movements into and out of the Black Sea. Also, warships from non-Black Sea states cannot be more than 45,000 tons in total, and only 30,000 tons can be from the same navy. So all in all, there are quite many rules that limit the amount of naval power that, for example, the United States can have in the Black Sea. One final and quite interesting rule, actually, is the one that says that only a total of 15,000 tons of foreign warships can pass through the Turkish Straits at any one time. And this means that there actually has to be quite a bit of coordination, because in practice, just one modern frigate will use about half of that. And there have been times in history where, especially the Soviet Union, speculated in constantly having ships in transit, which made it difficult for other countries to just find a room in the schedule to get their ship into the Black Sea. So those are the most important rules in the Montreux Convention. But it does not say anything about how anything else works. So, for example, there has been some debate about the right to innocent passage for foreign warships in the waters around Crimea. And I've seen people bringing the Montreux Convention into this discussion, but it has nothing to do with it. These things are regulated by UNCLOS, which is the Convention on the Law of the Sea, and by customary law. And so these things work just as in the rest of the world. So we should be careful about not assuming that everything about the Black Sea is special. And that's a good segue into the last topic that I want to touch on, which is the fact that the Montreux Convention is getting old, and that we now have UNCLOS, and that it could replace it if we wanted. UNCLOS came into force in 1994, and it also has rules about straits. But UNCLOS would remove almost all of those limitations from the Montreux Convention. And that's not really something that Turkey is interested in, so they have not ratified UNCLOS. And frankly, I think everyone else is also pretty happy about how the Montreux Convention works, because all sides benefit from the limitations that are put on the other side. So they're willing to accept the rules that as they are, basically. And it seems that they're also willing to close their eyes when, especially Russia, sometimes bends the rules a little bit, as long as it's not too much. So that was my rundown of the Montreux Convention. I hope you found it useful. It's an important thing to know about when you want to understand military situations in the Black Sea. And with that, I'll end it here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.